They were stars, yes. Icons, legends in silk gowns and crisp tuxedos, bathed in studio light and the smoky haze of film noir. But behind those eyes, those million-dollar gazes that once lit up every movie house in America, there burned something far more volatile than talent, something deeper than even the sharpest lens could capture. Desire, lust, devotion, betrayal, love. The kind that defied scripts, studios, and sometimes even morality itself. Elizabeth Taylor didn't just fall in love, she collided, combusted, more than once, and never quietly. Katharine Hepburn, dignified, intelligent. But she lived 27 years in the shadow of a married man's heart, choosing loyalty over applause. Rita Hayworth gave up Hollywood's throne to marry a real-life prince, only to find the fairy tale fading faster than celluloid. And Greta Garbo, she fled both love and limelight, haunted by what might have been. These were the great romances of Hollywood's golden age, affairs that weren't just whispered in backlots. They were shouted from gossip columns, condemned from pulpits, or hidden in shadows for decades. The men and women who lived them wore their secrets like perfume, intoxicating and always just out of reach. And when the curtains fell and the camera stopped rolling, what did they leave behind? Broken hearts, glimpses of real love, and legacies far messier and more human than the scripts they starred in. This is the true, untamed story of the biggest love affairs of Golden Age Hollywood. Come closer, because the spotlight's not on the stage anymore. It's in the dark corners, where the real stories lived. The love that lingered. You could hear it in the click of paparazzi shutters, long before the flashbulbs burst. Love, lust, scandal, it all made a sound in Hollywood. And in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, when the industry was a glittering machine run on image and illusion, even whispers could cause earthquakes. There was no social media, no tell-all interviews, just the quiet murmur of gossip in the corners of nightclubs like Mocambo, or the silent exchange of glances on a movie set thick with tension. But every now and then the illusion cracked, and when it did, the world took notice. On the set of Cleopatra, Elizabeth Taylor met Richard Burton. They were both married. The Vatican would later call it erotic vagrancy. Newspapers called it an international scandal, but what they really were? Two people who couldn't stay away. Meanwhile, across town and decades earlier, Spencer Tracy was the golden boy of MGM. Irish Catholic, quietly tortured a bottle never far from his hand. He met Katharine Hepburn in 1942, and for the next 27 years, she loved him. Patiently, privately, knowing he'd never divorce his wife, knowing she'd never truly be his, at least not in the way society might recognize. But what they had, it was real, realer than most marriages. Then there was Rita Hayworth, who made men weak with a single look and told the world, "Men go to bed with Gilda, but wake up with me." She was married 5 times, but one stood out. When she married Prince Ali Khan, the press called it a fairy tale. But behind palace doors, love can sour like anywhere else. And when it did, she was left holding her daughter and a fading sense of self-worth. Greta Garbo tried to hide hers. John Gilbert, the matinee idol who taught her how to love, was ready to marry her. But at the altar, she froze. Years later, she'd find comfort in the words and arms of Mercedes de Acosta in secret, always in secret. Garbo was always running, not from fame, but from feeling too much. And Gary Cooper, he was supposed to be the strong, silent type, rugged, all-American, but he left behind a trail of broken hearts longer than his list of film credits. Lupe Velez, Marlene Dietrich, Patricia Neal. A man adored by millions, yet restless, yearning, unable to settle into a single woman's world. These were more than love affairs, they were wars. Private battles waged under the pressure of fame, contract clauses, morality clauses, and the ever-watchful public eye. And yet, in stolen moments, in letters hidden in drawers, in glances exchanged across dinner tables, in handkerchiefs stained with cologne and tears, these actors and actresses carved out something real, messy, human, passionate love, the kind that doesn't fade, the kind that haunts. So we look back now, not to gawk, but to understand, because behind the studio lights and the movie star smiles, there were hearts that beat like ours, hearts that broke, and some that never quite healed. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. The violet-eyed volcano meets her match. It started with a glance. Not a subtle one. Nothing about Elizabeth Taylor was subtle. Her eyes, a shade of violet so hypnotic it made directors forget their blocking, locked with Richard Burton's for just a moment too long on the Rome set of Cleopatra in 1962. That one moment detonated everything. Burton was Welsh, blunt, brutal, brilliant, a stage-trained Shakespearean powerhouse with the voice of thunder and the reputation of a devil. He arrived to the set a respected actor with a wife and children back home. Elizabeth? She was already on her fourth marriage. America's violet-eyed temptress, a widow, a siren, a survivor. She'd married a hotel heir, a British actor, and then a man everyone despised, Eddie Fisher, who had left his wife Debbie Reynolds for her. Public sympathy was not on her side. They weren't meant to fall in love, but they didn't care. At first, they were combative. Their chemistry read like a fencing match, each line delivered with flirtation laced in disdain. Burton would brag in letters later about how he intended to resist her charms, how he found her overindulgent. And yet, he couldn't stop watching her. One morning on set, after a particularly long night of indulgence, Burton fumbled a line. Elizabeth laughed, not cruelly, but knowingly. That laugh cracked something open in him. He later wrote, "She was the most absurdly beautiful creature God ever made." The next day, they didn't come out of her trailer until mid-afternoon. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, they had already become the most scandalous lovers in the world. The Vatican condemned them. In an editorial, no less, calling their relationship erotic vagrancy. Members of Congress brought it up as a moral failing. Photographers climbed trees and bribed hotel staff just to catch a glimpse of the lovers. One famous shot captured them lounging on a yacht off the Amalfi Coast, sipping champagne, draped in diamonds and danger. When their affair became public, both their marriages crumbled. Elizabeth had to endure the fallout yet again. Another broken home, another public shaming. But with Burton, there was no shame, only fire. They married in March of 1964. She wore yellow chiffon and no veil. There were no apologies. They didn't want the world's approval. They had each other. Their marriage was chaotic, volatile, glamorous beyond comprehension. They fought in public. They drank, they danced. They made love in hotel rooms that reeked of Chanel and cigars. She bought him books. He bought her the Krupp diamond, 33 carats, later renamed the Taylor Burton diamond, and a yacht they never really used. And they worked, 11 films together. Every performance carried undertones of real-life love and resentment. In Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, their portrayal of a decaying marriage felt almost too real. Critics weren't sure where the acting ended and the truth began. They divorced in 1974. She said it was the drinking. He said it was the chaos. But a year later, in a move that felt ripped from a studio script, they remarried. This time it only lasted 10 months. After their second divorce, Burton remarried. Elizabeth did too, but they never stopped writing each other. Love letters, long and poetic, some angry, some aching, some full of longing. In one, Burton wrote, "You were the last great love of my life. I wish I could live it all over again." When he died in 1984, Elizabeth was shattered. She wasn't invited to the funeral, but later it was revealed he'd written her one last letter days before his death. She never shared the contents. She kept it by her bedside until her own passing in 2011. She once said, "After Richard, the men in my life were just there to hold the coat. Their love was never tidy. It was volcanic, dangerous, unapologetic. But it was real. Too real for the time they lived in. Too big for the world that watched them. They loved like stars burn out. Brilliant, blinding, and forever etched in the sky. Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. A quiet devotion, a lifetime in the shadows. He was Catholic, married, and melancholic. She was Protestant, unmarried, and defiantly independent. And yet, for 27 years, Katharine Hepburn loved Spencer Tracy, not with the fireworks of tabloid scandal, but with the kind of steady, soul-bound devotion that few ever witness. Their first meeting was on the set of Woman of the Year in 1942. Tracy, already a titan at MGM, was shorter than Hepburn expected. She famously quipped, "I'm afraid I'm too tall for you, mister." Tracy. He didn't miss a beat. "Don't worry, I'll cut you down to my size." Everyone laughed. But what passed between them in that moment wasn't a joke. It was recognition, the kind that bypasses logic and lands squarely in the chest. Hepburn was used to being in control. She was sharp, well-read, and had no interest in the domestic ideals Hollywood peddled to its leading ladies. Tracy was different, troubled, mysterious, a devout Catholic battling guilt and alcoholism. He had been married to Louise Treadwell since 1923, and though they lived separately, he refused to divorce her, largely for religious reasons and out of loyalty to their deaf son, John. Still, something about him softened Hepburn, and something about her gave him peace. Their affair wasn't loud, it wasn't photographed or splashed across newspapers. They didn't go to premieres together or vacation in Monaco. Instead, they lived in adjacent bungalows. She'd sneak into his room at night and leave before dawn. She protected his privacy fiercely, shielded him from the public, the studios, even from himself. Tracy was often withdrawn, tormented by internal battles. His drinking was legendary, sometimes rendering him unreachable for days. Hepburn never left. When he fell into darkness, she turned down roles to stay near. She cooked for him, cared for him, kept him anchored when nothing else could. In private, they shared a rhythm all their own. A glance across a set, the way she lit his cigarettes, the way he once whispered during a break in filming, "You and me, we're okay, aren't we?" And she, smiling gently, replied, "Always." Their on-screen chemistry reflected the complexity of their bond. They starred in 9 films together, from Adam's Rib to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and each performance pulsed with a tension that wasn't just acting. In real life, their love was tender but tethered, passionate but unspoken. Hepburn never demanded more than he could give, and he, in turn, gave her a quiet, enduring presence. A rare intimacy built not on public declarations, but on shared silence. In 1963, as Tracy's health declined, Hepburn moved into his home under the guise of nursing him. She cared for him every day, refusing work, refusing anything that took her away from him. For 4 years, she stood vigil, becoming his closest companion, his caretaker, his confidant. On June 10, 1967, Tracy died of a heart attack. Hepburn was there, just feet away. She didn't attend the funeral. She didn't want to embarrass his family or draw attention to their long, unofficial union. She grieved privately, just as she had loved him. It wasn't until years later that she spoke openly about their relationship. In her memoir, she wrote of him with a kind of reverent ache. "He was my best friend. I loved him deeply, and I never wanted to intrude." Hepburn never married. And in every interview, every pause, every sidelong glance when his name was mentioned, you could see it. He was the one, the only one. Their love wasn't built for the spotlight. It wasn't flamboyant or luxurious. It was quiet, enduring, hidden, yes, but no less real. Sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones whispered in the dark, lived in fragments, and remembered in every heartbeat that follows. Rita Hayworth and Prince Ali Khan. The Princess of Hollywood meets her fairy tale and her disillusionment. Rita Hayworth was the dream, the kind men paid to watch in the dark. With a toss of her auburn hair and the slow slide of a satin glove, she became Gilda, sultry, mysterious, and devastatingly unattainable. But what most didn't see, beyond the screen siren facade, was a woman desperately seeking something simple: stability, love, a place to rest her aching heart. By 1948, Rita had already been married twice. First to promoter Edward Judson, who'd built her into a star while controlling nearly every move she made. Then to Orson Welles, the genius enfant terrible of cinema. That marriage began with fireworks and ended in silence, her loneliness growing louder with each passing day. "He loved me as if I were a movie," she later confessed, "not as a woman." So when she met Prince Ali Khan at a dinner party in Cannes, she wasn't just meeting royalty, she was meeting an escape hatch. Ali Khan was the son of the Aga Khan, heir to a vast spiritual dynasty, and infamous for his playboy reputation. He was suave, worldly, and utterly smitten with Rita. The press couldn't get enough. Hollywood's reigning goddess, swept off her feet by a real-life prince. The headlines practically wrote themselves. Their courtship was dizzying: yachts, diamonds, dinners beneath Mediterranean stars. For Rita, it felt like stepping into a fantasy, a chance to leave behind the harsh lights of Hollywood and live in a world where she could simply be a woman, not a product. But nothing in her life came without conflict. Columbia Pictures, the studio that had made her a star, threatened to suspend her. They had no interest in losing their golden girl to a foreign land. The public, too, reacted with mixed emotions. Some romanticized the match, others resented her for leaving America behind. Still, on May 27, 1949, Rita Hayworth became Princess Ali Khan in a small, elegant ceremony in Vallauris, France. She wore a pale blue suit and a smile that hid more than it revealed. At first, it was beautiful. Their daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, was born later that year. Rita seemed radiant in photographs. Royalty looked good on her. But behind the palace walls, cracks began to form. Ali Khan had no intention of slowing his lifestyle. The same playboy charm that had wooed Rita now found other targets. He traveled constantly, surrounded by women, diplomats, distractions. Rita, often left alone with their baby, grew isolated and disillusioned. Hollywood, for all its manipulations, had at least given her purpose. In France, she became a curiosity, a Hollywood export in a royal cage. By 1951, the fairy tale had crumbled. Rita filed for divorce, citing extreme mental cruelty. She returned to America with Yasmin in her arms and sadness in her eyes. And then came the damning line, an admission that shocked and saddened the world. "Every man I have ever known has fallen in love with Gilda," she said, "and awakened with me." It was more than a line. It was a truth soaked in bitterness and heartbreak. Rita had played the fantasy for so long, even those closest to her couldn't distinguish between the woman and the screen goddess. Not even her prince. In the years that followed, Rita's life spiraled. She married 3 more times. None lasted. The years of emotional strain, the rejection, the constant objectification, all took their toll. She drank, she withdrew, and eventually she faded from the spotlight altogether. But in the eyes of her daughter, Yasmine, and in the memories of those brief, glittering days on the French Riviera, Rita Hayworth was more than Gilda. She was a woman who dared to chase love, even if it meant losing herself. The Princess of Hollywood may have never found her kingdom, but she never stopped searching for it, right up until the end. Greta Garbo, the woman who ran from love and the letters that remained. She was the enigma, the eternal close-up. Greta Garbo didn't just act, she haunted. With a gaze that seemed to pierce through the screen, she drew millions into her world without ever letting anyone into hers. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Garbo arrived in Hollywood in the mid-1920s from Sweden, her beauty almost alien in its perfection, angular, ethereal, unknowable. Studios called her the Divine. Critics called her the Sphinx. But behind the carved cheekbones and timeless stare was a woman terrified of vulnerability, yet constantly drawn to the edge of it. And then came John Gilbert. He was MGM's golden boy, America's leading romantic idol. Their chemistry ignited on the set of Flesh and the Devil in 1926. Off-screen, it was no different. They fell in quickly, deeply, recklessly. Garbo moved into his home. He proposed. She accepted. Or so he thought. The wedding was arranged. The date was set. The guests were invited. But as the clock ticked down, something in her began to unravel. Garbo couldn't go through with it, not because she didn't love him, by all accounts she did, but because love, to her, meant captivity. She feared marriage would smother her independence. She feared what she would become if she surrendered. So she fled. Gilbert was devastated, publicly humiliated, privately heartbroken. His career began to falter while Garbo's soared. They worked together again, awkwardly, tension barely concealed on screen. But the damage was done. He died in 1936, just 38 years old. Many said he never recovered from her refusal. Garbo, for her part, rarely spoke of him again. But years later, in a rare confession, she whispered, "I was in love with him, but I froze." And that became her pattern. In the decades that followed, whispers surrounded Garbo. Of women, of longing, of a life lived in shadows. But one name lingered longer and louder than the rest. Mercedes de Acosta. A playwright, poet, and fierce intellect, Mercedes shared something rare with Garbo: emotional safety. They exchanged hundreds of letters over the years, some filled with longing, others with philosophical musings, but many so intimate that Garbo's estate later fought to keep them private. In one, Garbo wrote, "I dream of your voice at night. I dream you walking beside me." They traveled together, quarreled like lovers, reconnected in silence. Though neither ever confirmed the nature of their relationship publicly, the intimacy in their words spoke louder than labels ever could. But true to form, Garbo pulled away, always. Whenever closeness threatened to define her, she vanished. She once said, "There are many things in your heart you can never tell to another person. They are you, your private joys and sorrows, and you can never tell them. You cheapen yourself, the inside of yourself, when you tell them." She retired from film at 35 at the height of her fame and never returned. For the rest of her life, she walked the streets of New York in oversized coats and dark glasses, shopping for vegetables, reading alone in cafes, avoiding all invitations to revisit the past. She never married, never gave interviews, never allowed Hollywood or love to consume her. Yet those who knew her said she never stopped yearning. In a letter found after her death, addressed to no one and signed by no one, she wrote, "I wanted to be alone, but only because I feared no one would stay if I asked them to stay. Garbo's love stories weren't about scandal. They were about silence, about doors cracked open and then quietly shut. But in those letters, in those near misses, in the shadows she left behind, we find a woman who felt deeply, even if she could never quite bring herself to say it aloud. Gary Cooper, the silent heartbreaker, and the women who couldn't forget him. He was tall. He was soft-spoken. He wore cowboy hats in his movies and humility in real life. Gary Cooper was the embodiment of Hollywood's strong, silent type. Stoic, moral, slow to speak, but quick to act. But if you looked past the rugged exterior and the shy smile, there was a man who ignited desire wherever he went and left behind a trail of longing hearts that even his silence couldn't quiet. Born in Montana and raised among wide skies and hard winters, Cooper came to Hollywood not as a dreamer, but as an illustrator. He stumbled into acting through stunt work, but once those clear eyes met the camera lens, the studios knew they'd found a leading man who could command an entire film with just a glance. And that's what he did, again and again. But as his fame grew, so did the whispers. In the 1920s and early 1930s, Cooper was romantically linked to a constellation of Golden Age beauties. Clara Bow, the original It Girl, was one of his earliest lovers. Their affair was passionate and public, until it ended with bitterness on both sides. He moved on to Lupe Vélez, the fiery Mexican actress who loved him so intensely it frightened him. When he began pulling away, she reportedly threatened him with a pistol. He fled the relationship, but he never forgot her. Marlene Dietrich came next after they filmed Morocco. Their chemistry was palpable, raw. She called him the most completely masculine man I've ever met. He left her too. She never forgave him. By the time Cooper married socialite Veronica Balfe in 1933, he was trying, truly trying, to settle down. For a time it worked. They had a daughter, a quiet home. He took her to the Oscars. But Cooper's heart, it seemed, couldn't be fenced in. And then came Patricia Neal. She was young, in awe, a rising star. They met while filming The Fountainhead in 1949, and from the moment he looked at her, she was undone. He was the kind of man who made a woman feel fragile and precious, she later said. Their affair was secret, but intense. It lasted 3 years. He promised her they'd be together, that he'd leave Veronica. But he never did. He couldn't. Torn between obligation and passion, Cooper drifted back to his family, but not before breaking Patricia's heart completely. When it ended, she collapsed. Mentally, emotionally. She left Hollywood. It took her years to recover. Decades later, she still spoke of him with a kind of quiet ache. He was the love of my life. I just wasn't the love of his. But even Cooper wasn't immune to the consequences. In the final years of his life, after his health began to fail, he grew reflective, withdrawn. His eyes, once so clear and commanding, became tired, haunted. One afternoon, not long before his death in 1961, he was seen walking alone through a Santa Monica park. A fan recognized him and asked, "Aren't you Gary Cooper?" He smiled faintly and replied, "Used to be." He had spent a life moving from woman to woman, each one more dazzling than the last. Yet he ended his days quietly, at home, with the wife he had never truly let in, and the daughter who had learned not to ask too many questions. Gary Cooper never raised his voice, never confessed in public, never apologized, but the women who loved him, Clara, Lupe, Marlene, Patricia, they remembered him not just as a lover, but as a ghost, the man who arrived like a dream and disappeared like smoke. And maybe that was the tragedy, that behind the icon, behind the myth of the American hero, was a man who couldn't stay, who wanted love, but couldn't sit still long enough to keep it. Love in the spotlight, pain in the shadows. They had it all, didn't they? The money, the fame, the admiration of millions. And yet, for Elizabeth, Katharine, Rita, Greta, and Gary, the one thing they couldn't script, couldn't rehearse, couldn't win with a close-up, was peace and love. By the time Elizabeth Taylor buried Richard Burton in her heart, the press had already crowned her a scandal queen. What they missed was the grief, the ache, the love letter by her bedside for 27 years. She wore diamonds, yes, but the weight she carried was heavier than gold. Katharine Hepburn never got a wedding ring, never got to sit front row at Spencer Tracy's funeral, never got to call herself his partner, though she was. Through illness, addiction, and silence, she remained. It wasn't about ownership. It was about presence, quiet, constant, unwavering, and yet she mourned him alone. Rita Hayworth gave up the silver screen for a crown. But when the fairy tale shattered, she was left clutching her daughter and a cracked reflection of herself. Gilda was an illusion, but the pain was real. She didn't need more husbands. She needed someone to see her. Truly see her. Greta Garbo built a fortress of solitude. She walked away from fame at its peak, but love haunted her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. The woman who wanted to be alone may have been begging for someone to break through that solitude, to stay, even when she couldn't ask. And Gary Cooper, the cowboy, the gentleman, the icon, left hearts scattered behind him like cigarette ashes on a dressing room floor. He was loved deeply, perhaps even desperately, but something inside him always said, not yet, not here, not forever. They were all searching for safety, for freedom, for someone who loved the person, not the persona. In the end, what they left behind wasn't just movies or magazine covers. They left behind love letters hidden in drawers. They left behind eyes that still searched for them in black and white films. They left behind stories, some whispered, some shouted, that refused to be forgotten. Because these were not perfect love stories. They were human ones. Messy, beautiful, tragic. They loved like stars, brilliant, burning, destined to fade. But what a light they gave us. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. The echo of a laugh across a soundstage, the scribble of a letter never sent, the closing of a trailer door, the last breath of a secret they carried to the grave. They were lovers, yes, but more than that, they were proof that even gods and goddesses of the screen craved something none of their scripts could promise: to be truly seen, truly known, truly loved. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment down below as it helps support this channel. Also, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our newest videos. Thanks for watching.